that this brings us on to another person, Sacha Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a story that caught my eye earlier this week that ties together Labour Party figures, the UK music industry, central government funds relating to COVID, and also the money behind the emerging independent media scene in the UK. It starts with this story, which, and the question is, did Sacha Lord cheat his way to £400,000 worth of public money during the pandemic? And the first question that you're going to ask after that is, who is Sacha Lord? Well, this is Sacha Lord. He's got his shiny website here with his name in big letters, and he is a big-time event promoter, amongst other things. He runs Parklife Festival in Manchester, which is a huge annual gathering coming up again in June. Lots of big-name stars from the major labels and elsewhere. He also runs the Warehouse Project, which basically makes him the biggest nightclub promoter in the UK. They take over huge former industrial units across Manchester every year and do seasons of shows towards the end of the year. He's also the chairman of the NTIA, the Night Times Industry Association, which represents the interests of clubland venues, restaurants, which interestingly was founded by Norris Windross, and then it was run by Alan Miller from the Together Declaration up until Alan resigned a couple of years ago to run Together. That's an aside. Back to Sacha Lord. He's a very busy man, right? Very busy and prominent man, particularly around Manchester. He's also the nighttime economy advisor to Andy Burnham. Right, so he's tapped right into the top levels of the Labour Party, and in fact has himself been tipped as a potential mayor at some point in the future. And he's certainly doing a lot of the things that you'd expect someone with political ambitions to be doing. So he's a very, very prominent businessman, and I'm sure he'd probably say a philanthropist who's been accused of fraudulently obtaining public funds, right? So it's quite a serious accusation here. Let's go back to the article, and we can see that the Mill, it says, has obtained evidence that a security company controlled by Lord repeatedly lied in an application for COVID-19 support. And as a result of this misleading application, the company received over £400,000 of taxpayers' money at the height of the pandemic. And we've seen a copy of the funding application in which Lord's business partner makes a series of false claims about what it does, calling itself the backbone of the national creative events sector. Mark Turnbull, who's a former director of the company, has told us, the Mill, that he believes Lord's company is guilty of fraud and should be investigated by the police. So this clearly seems like it's got legs. Lord vehemently denied the claim earlier in the week. He threatened to sue the Mill for defamation. So my learned friends placed a little statement in the Times of London saying that we vehemently disagree with the article and strongly dispute the accuracy, reliability and transparency of its sources. The Mill, to their credit, stood their ground. They've been making hay out of this all week. They put out the request for further information and evidence from their community and got a lot of information back. And actually, it turns out just this morning that Lord has withdrawn his threat to sue the Mill. He said, I've decided not to pursue legal action for the time being, but he continues to reject their allegations in the strongest terms. So there's something going on here, and we'll see how it develops over the coming weeks and months, right? So this is quite dodgy, potentially fraudulent behaviour circulating around the top levels of the Labour Party, right? You know, coming up to the general election, I think it's important to look at this. But actually, I think it's useful to take this as an opportune moment to look more broadly at Lord's role in COVID, but also the way that the cultural sector, the events industry was roped into helping coerce people to complying with COVID restrictions, right? So Lord himself was hypercritical of people breaking the lockdown restrictions. He says here in this tweet that from June 2020, that if you are one of the morons who attended one of the illegal raves last night, you're a disgrace. You aren't clubbers. You're just selfish idiots. Right? This is a man with really significant influence in the music industry, particularly as it relates to younger clubbers. Right? This is really important. This is about the youth in particular. Right? And the event industry was used to coerce the population into accepting unprecedented lockdowns, mass vaccinations, and most importantly, I think, digital identity systems and the normalization of having to share private health status and data in order to engage in the basic functions of society, right? So this is from the Warehouse Project website. This is their COVID policy. They ask all ticket holders to demonstrate their COVID-19 status via the COVID pass, the NHS COVID pass upon arrival. You have to have proof of a negative lateral flow test. You remember all this rubbish we had to do? Or you have to prove that you've been vaccinated with both doses, with the second dose being received at least 14 days before the date of the event. Right? So this was the Warehouse Project. This is Sacha Lord's business pushing government policy, insisting that people coming to these events comply with things that should not be complied with. We should never have been asked to comply with them, right? And it's not just the Warehouse Project, it's the entire events industry. We saw this happening all over the place. And I think that the Arts Council sits right at the centre of this, right? So we talked about this £400,000, but where did it come from? It came from the Arts Council. Right, what is the Arts Council? It's an arm's length body linked directly to DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. The Arts Council itself was set up in 1946 and it was initiated by John Maynard Keynes, the economist, the socialist economist. It's currently chaired by Nicholas Sirota, who was the former director of the Tate, and he is also a companion of honour to the King. Yeah, one of only 66 people who hold that position. Yeah, and Oliver Dowden, who's currently the Deputy Prime Minister, telling everyone that we've got to prep and get ourselves ready for some unspecified catastrophe that's going to come up in the next few months. He was the running DCMS at the time, right? So this is central government money, taxpayer money, controlled by central government. It's probably a more accurate way of describing it, of a fund of £1.57 billion, about 900 million of which was distributed to organisations like the Warehouse Project, this fake security company that Sacha Lord is, or actually it was a real security company. They presented it as something other than a security company in order to get the money. Sadler's Wells, the Roundhouse in Camden, Fabric Nightclub, a bunch of the kind of digital ticketing platforms like Resident Advisor and Boiler Room. Like all of these people were getting money from the government, ostensibly to see them through the pandemic, but with strings attached, and as a way of using these organisations to comply with and disseminate public policy in response to what we now know in hindsight was a fake pandemic, right? And none of these measures should have been put in place, and they certainly shouldn't have been paid for by on the public purse, and they shouldn't have been promoted by these organisations who have been in receipt of these funds. I think it's an absolute scandal, and we can't let this just disappear down the memory hole, as I think that a lot of people would like us to do. So we'll talk about this more in the future, and I'm particularly interested in seeing how Mr. Lord's case develops. Just as a final point in this, I want to just focus in on the mill, actually. So we talked about the case and this story. Well, where was the story found? So it was on this news website. So this is a bit of information that the mill have shared about their own performance and the scale of their operations. So it's an online thing. It runs on the Substack platform. It launched in June 2020. They then launched in October of that year another title called The Post, focused on Liverpool. Then in March 21, The Tribune, focused on Sheffield. So these are very locally focused news operations, essentially there to replace the local newspapers. They've massively grown their audience. So they're up to about 100,000 people now, with about 5 to 10,000 of paid subscribers. They're quite vocal. They're very open about this stuff. They talk about it a lot on their social media. And they've also just launched another title called The Dispatch in Birmingham in June last year. So they're making a big play to become a new national news network. But the question is, who's backing this? Yeah, because they talk about themselves as being independent, but they aren't really independent. They've got a lot of funding that's come in from pretty top level people in the traditional media. I actually mentioned this back in October and November. Mark Thompson, who is the current CEO of CNN and was formerly the Director General at the BBC during the Jimmy Savile cover-up, right? And then he basically skipped the country, went to the New York Times. He's now at CNN. He's put a load of money into the mill. That's quite interesting. They've also been getting some very high-profile recognition. Joshi Herrmann, the founder of the mill, was at the Truth Tellers event last week. alongside Jeff Zucker, amongst other people, who was the former chief executive of CNN. He was also at the Lords recently, giving some testimony to the Lords on the media in the UK. He's been getting bigged up by William Hague in the Times, as well as Alan Rusbridger, the former Guardian editor. So the Mill has got some big backers, and I just wonder whether Joshi Herrmann and the team there really know what they're getting themselves into. So watch this space.